Princess Isabella stood at the tall window of Kensington Palace, watching the first snowflakes of December dance against the glass. At 28, she had experienced many royal Christmases, but this year felt different. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on her shoulders as she traced patterns in the condensation with her finger. 3 months earlier, her beloved grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The entire nation mourned, but for Isabella, the loss was deeply personal. Her grandmother had been her closest confidant, the one person who understood the burden of royal duty while never losing sight of what truly mattered: family, compassion, and service to others. "Your Highness," came a gentle voice from behind her. Isabella turned to see Mrs. Margaret Thornfield, the palace's head of charitable affairs, standing in the doorway with a stack of papers in her arms. The elderly woman had worked for the royal family for over 30 years, and her kind eyes held the same warmth they always had, though Isabella noticed new lines of concern etched around them. "Please, Margaret, just Isabella when we're alone," the princess replied, offering a small smile. "What brings you here this morning?" Margaret stepped forward, her practical shoes clicking softly on the polished marble floor. "I wanted to discuss the annual Christmas charity drive with you. With everything that's happened, I wasn't sure if you'd want to proceed as usual this year." Isabella moved away from the window, smoothing down her navy blue dress. The Christmas charity drive had been her grandmother's favorite tradition, visiting children's hospitals, homeless shelters, and elderly care homes throughout December, bringing gifts and spending time with those who needed it most. It was never about the publicity or the photographs, though those certainly followed. It was about connection, about remembering that royalty came with responsibility. "Of course we'll proceed," Isabella said without hesitation. Grandmother would have insisted on it. "In fact, I think we should expand it this year." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "Expand it, Your Highness?" Isabella began pacing, her mind already working through possibilities. "Yes, I want to do something special, something that would make her proud. I've been thinking about this for weeks. What if we didn't just visit the usual places? What if we really went out into the community, found the families and individuals who were struggling but wouldn't normally receive royal attention?" The older woman set down her papers on the antique desk near the window. "That sounds wonderful in principle, but the security concerns alone would be enormous. And the logistics, I know it won't be easy," Isabella interrupted gently. "But I keep thinking about what grandmother used to say. She'd tell me that being royal wasn't about living in a palace or wearing a crown. It was about being a bridge between those who have everything and those who have nothing." Margaret nodded slowly. She had heard Queen Elizabeth say those very words many times over the years. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Isabella moved to the desk and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. She had been sketching ideas for days, unable to sleep properly since the idea had first taken hold. "I want to identify 12 families or individuals in different parts of the country. Not people who are already connected to charities or organizations, but ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Single mothers working multiple jobs to feed their children, elderly people spending Christmas alone, families who've lost their homes, children in foster care who age out of the system with nowhere to go." She flipped through pages covered in her neat handwriting. "I want to spend real time with them. Not just hand them a gift and take a photo, but actually sit down and listen to their stories. Help them in meaningful ways that will make a lasting difference." Margaret picked up the notebook and began reading. Isabella had done her homework. There were detailed notes about various social issues, statistics about poverty and homelessness, and preliminary research on how other royal families around the world approach charitable work. "This is quite ambitious," Margaret said after a few moments, "and very different from the traditional approach." "That's exactly the point," Isabella replied. "Traditional approaches are important, but they're also predictable. I want to surprise people, including myself. I want to step outside the bubble and really understand what life is like for ordinary citizens." Margaret closed the notebook and looked at the princess with new respect. Your grandmother would indeed be proud. But, Isabella, are you prepared for what you might encounter? Some of these situations could be quite difficult to witness. Isabella had been asking herself the same question for weeks. The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure she was prepared. Her royal upbringing had shielded her from many harsh realities of life. She had visited hospitals and charities, of course, but always in controlled environments with carefully selected people to meet. I think that's exactly why I need to do this, she said finally. If I'm going to be an effective advocate for people, I need to truly understand their struggles. I can't help solve problems I've never really seen up close. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, then picked up her papers again. Very well. I'll need to coordinate with security, the press office, and your private secretary. This will require careful planning. I know you'll make it work, Isabella said gratefully. You always do. After Margaret left, Isabella returned to the window. The snow was falling more heavily now, blanketing the perfectly manicured gardens in pristine white. She thought about her grandmother's funeral, how thousands of ordinary people had lined the streets to pay their respects. They hadn't come for the pageantry or the tradition, though those were certainly impressive. They had come because Queen Elizabeth had spent 70 years proving that she cared about them. That evening, Isabella joined her parents for dinner in the smaller family dining room. King Charles sat at the head of the long mahogany table, looking distinguished but tired. The past months had been difficult for him, too, stepping fully into his role as monarch while grieving the loss of his mother. Queen Camilla sat to his right, her warm presence providing a calming influence on the family dynamics. I understand you're planning something special for this year's Christmas charity work, her father said as the first course was served. His tone was carefully neutral, which Isabella knew meant he had concerns, but was trying to be supportive. Margaret spoke with you? Isabella asked, cutting into her salmon. She felt it was important to give me a heads up, given the scope of what you're proposing, he replied. I admire your intentions, darling, but I'm worried about the risks involved. Queen Camilla looked between father and daughter, then spoke gently. What kind of risks are you most concerned about, Charles? Security, for one thing, the king said. Spontaneous visits to unvetted locations with people we don't know. The potential for situations that could be manipulated or misunderstood. And, frankly, I'm concerned about Isabella's safety, both physical and emotional. Isabella set down her fork. I understand your concerns, Papa, but I'm not suggesting we do anything reckless. We'll work with security to ensure proper protocols. And as for emotional safety, well, sometimes we need to step outside our comfort zones to grow. Your grandmother always said that, Camilla observed with a small smile. She believed that royalty should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Charles looked at his wife with affection. She did say that, didn't she? Usually right before she did something that gave her security detail nightmares. Isabella seized the moment. This is exactly what she would want me to do. You know it is. She spent her entire reign finding ways to connect with ordinary people, to show them that the monarchy cared about their daily lives. Her father was quiet for several minutes, considering. Finally, he nodded slowly. Very well, but I want detailed security assessments for every location and every family you plan to visit. And I want regular check-ins throughout the process. Of course, Isabella agreed quickly. Thank you for trusting me with this. Over the following days, Margaret worked tirelessly to transform Isabella's vision into reality. She coordinated with local councils, social services, and charitable organizations across the country to identify potential families and individuals who might benefit from the princess's attention. Each case was carefully researched and vetted, not for publicity value, but for genuine need and the potential for meaningful impact. The first family they identified was the Johnsons, living in a council flat in Manchester. Sarah Johnson was a single mother of 3 young children, working 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet. Her ex-husband had stopped paying child support 6 months earlier, and she had been struggling to keep up with rent and basic necessities. The children, Emma, age 8, Tom, age 6, and little Lucy, just 4, had been looking forward to Christmas, but Sarah knew there would be little money for gifts this year. The second case was particularly close to Isabella's heart. Harold Winters was 83 years old and had been living alone since his wife of 55 years passed away the previous spring. Their children lived abroad, and Harold had been finding it increasingly difficult to manage on his own. He had no plans for Christmas dinner and had admitted to a local volunteer that he sometimes went days without speaking to another person. In Birmingham, they found the Patel family. Raj and Priya had come to England 15 years earlier with dreams of building a better life for their children. Raj had worked as an engineer in India, but his qualifications weren't recognized in the UK, so he drove a taxi while studying for British certification. A car accident 3 months earlier had left him unable to work, and the family was facing eviction from their small rented home. Each case presented unique challenges and opportunities. Isabella spent hours reading the files Margaret compiled, trying to understand not just the basic facts of each situation, but the human emotions and daily realities behind them. She wanted to arrive at each visit prepared to offer more than just sympathy and a donation. As word began to spread quietly through the palace about Isabella's plans, reactions were mixed. Some staff members worried about the departure from tradition and the potential complications. Others were excited by the princess's passion and commitment to making a real difference. Lady Catherine Pembroke, Isabella's longtime friend and occasional advisor, visited the palace one evening to discuss the project. The two women sat in Isabella's private sitting room, a fire crackling in the ornate fireplace while they drank tea from delicate bone china cups. "I think what you're doing is admirable," Catherine said, "but I hope you're prepared for the media attention this will generate. Once word gets out about these unconventional visits, every journalist in the country will want to follow your every move." Isabella had been dreading this aspect of the plan. The British press could be relentless, and she worried about the privacy and dignity of the family she wanted to help. Margaret is working with the press office to establish clear boundaries. "We'll allow limited coverage of some visits, but only with the family's explicit consent. And we're making it clear that this is about service, not publicity." "That's good in theory," Catherine replied carefully, "but you know how these things go. Once you start something like this, it takes on a life of its own." Isabella nodded, understanding her friend's concerns. "I know there are risks, but, Catherine, I can't keep living in this bubble, making speeches about caring for people without actually knowing what their lives are like. If I'm going to represent the monarchy in the modern world, I need to be more than just a figurehead." Catherine studied her friend's face in the firelight. She had known Isabella since their school days, and she could see the determination that had always driven the princess when she truly believed in something. "Your grandmother would be proud," Catherine said finally, and terrified, but definitely proud. As December progressed, the preparations intensified. Security teams conducted thorough assessments of each planned location. Social workers and local officials were consulted to ensure the visits would be helpful rather than disruptive. Gift coordinators worked to identify meaningful presents that would address real needs rather than generic royal offerings. Isabella insisted on being involved in every detail. She wanted to understand each family situation thoroughly before arriving on their doorstep. She studied maps of their neighborhoods, researched local resources that might be available to help them long after her visit ended, and even practiced conversations with Margaret, trying to anticipate how she might respond to difficult questions or emotional moments. 2 weeks before Christmas, Isabella made her first visit. The destination was a small town in Wales where she would meet with 16-year-old Marcus Williams, who had aged out of foster care earlier that year and was living in a tiny bedsit while working at a local supermarket and trying to finish his A-levels. As her car pulled up outside the modest building, Isabella felt her heart racing. Through the briefings and preparations, this had all felt somewhat theoretical. Now, facing the reality of walking into a stranger's life during their most difficult moments, she wondered if she had been naive to think she could make a meaningful difference. But as she stepped out of the car and saw the young man waiting nervously by his front door, his thin frame bundled in a jacket that had seen better days, Isabella knew there was no turning back. This was exactly where she needed to be. Marcus Williams couldn't believe what was happening. When a social worker, Mrs. Davies, had called 3 days earlier to tell him that Princess Isabella wanted to visit him, he had thought it was some kind of joke. Now, watching the elegant woman in the navy coat step out of the black car, he realized this was very real indeed. Marcus! Princess Isabella approached him with a warm smile, extending her hand. I'm Isabella. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me. Up close, Marcus could see that she was prettier than in the photographs, but also more human somehow. Her eyes held genuine kindness, not the distant politeness he had expected from royalty. Your Highness, he stammered, not sure if he should bow or shake hands or what. Please, just Isabella, she said, gently taking his hand. I hope you don't mind, but I brought some friend along. This is Detective Inspector James Morrison, who helps keep me safe, and Mrs. Thornfield, who arranged our meeting. Marcus nodded nervously at the 2 other adults, then gestured toward the entrance to his building. Would you like to come up? It's not much, but I would love to see where you live, Isabella said sincerely. Lead the way. The narrow staircase smelled of damp carpet and cooking odors from various flats. Marcus felt embarrassed by the peeling wallpaper and the broken light fixture on the second landing. But when he glanced back at the princess, she didn't seem bothered at all. She was looking around with genuine curiosity, not judgment. His bedsit was on the 3rd floor, one small room with a kitchenette in the corner, a narrow bed, a small desk, and not much else. Marcus had tried to tidy up as much as possible, but there wasn't really anywhere to hide the fact that he owned very little. This is cozy, Isabella said, and Marcus could tell she meant it. She wasn't using the polite tone adults usually employed when they were being kind about his living situation. How long have you been here? Since July, Marcus replied, gesturing for her to sit in the room's only chair while he perched on the edge of the bed. When I turned 16 and aged out of care, they helped me find this place. The rent's not too bad, and it's close to work and college. Isabella settled into the chair and looked around the room with genuine interest. She noticed the stack of textbooks on the desk, the carefully organized schedule taped to the wall, and the small framed photograph of Marcus with what appeared to be a group of other young people. Tell me about your studies, she said. Mrs. Thornfield mentioned you're working toward your A-levels while working at the supermarket. That must be incredibly challenging. Marcus felt himself relaxing slightly. He had expected royal small talk, but the princess seemed genuinely interested in his life. It's pretty mental, if I'm honest. I work 25 hours a week at Tesco, then try to fit in college around that. Sometimes I fall asleep in history class because I was up until 2 in the morning restocking shelves. What subject are you studying? Isabella asked, noticing several books about computer programming mixed in with more traditional academic texts. Maths, computer science, and business studies, Marcus replied, his enthusiasm showing for the first time. I want to study computer science at university, maybe software engineering. I've been teaching myself Python programming in my spare time, what little I have of it. Isabella leaned forward, genuinely impressed. That's remarkable. You're essentially supporting yourself while pursuing an education that will open up amazing opportunities. How do you stay motivated when things get difficult? Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking out the small window at the gray December sky. I think about my little sister sometimes. She's still in care, in a different placement. I want to be successful enough someday to help her when she ages out too. And honestly, I don't really have any other choice. It's either make something of myself, or, well, I don't like to think about the alternatives. The raw honesty in his voice moved Isabella more than she had expected. She had read about his situation in the briefing files, but hearing him speak about his determination to create a better life despite the odds was truly inspiring. Tell me about your sister, Isabella said gently. Marcus's face brightened immediately. Lucy's 13 now. She's brilliant, way smarter than me. She loves reading and writing stories. We see each other once a month when I can afford the train fare to visit her placement. She always asks if I've heard from our mom, He trailed off, the brightness fading from his expression. But you haven't, Isabella prompted softly. Not since we went into care 5 years ago. Social services said she needed to get clean and stable before she could have contact with us. I keep hoping maybe someday, but I can't count on it. I have to focus on what I can control. Isabella was struck by the young man's maturity and resilience. At 16, he was dealing with challenges that would overwhelm many adults, yet he maintained hope and worked steadily toward his goals. What's the most difficult part about living independently so young? She asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. The loneliness, mostly. Don't get me wrong. I'm grateful to have this place and my job, but sometimes, especially at Christmas, I realize I don't really have anyone to celebrate with. Everyone at work has families to go home to. The other kids at college live with their parents and complain about how annoying their siblings are, and I just think about how much I'd give to have those problems instead. Isabella felt a pang of guilt thinking about her own privileged upbringing, surrounded by family and luxury, while this remarkable young man faced each day alone. What do you usually do for Christmas? Work, mostly, Marcus said with a rueful smile. I volunteer to take extra shifts because they pay time and a half on holidays, and most people want the day off anyway. I'll probably get a ready meal from the shop and watch something on Netflix. It's not so bad. But Isabella could see in his eyes that it was bad, that spending Christmas alone in a tiny bedsit while working to serve other families their holiday groceries was heartbreaking for a 16-year-old who should be worrying about exam scores and football matches, not rent payments and loneliness. Marcus, she said carefully, would you be open to spending Christmas a bit differently this year? He looked puzzled. What do you mean? Isabella had been thinking about this moment throughout their conversation. The original plan had been to bring Marcus some gifts and perhaps arrange for some additional support services. But sitting here listening to his story, she realized he needed something much more fundamental. Connection, family, a sense of belonging. I'd like to invite you to spend Christmas Day with my family, she said. At the palace. If you're comfortable with that idea. Marcus stared at her, certain he had misheard. At the palace? With your family? I know it might seem overwhelming, Isabella continued quickly, but I think you'd enjoy meeting everyone. My father loves talking to young people about their ambitions, and my stepmother makes the most incredible Christmas pudding. Plus, I'd love for you to meet my cousin Peter. He's studying computer science at Cambridge and would probably enjoy discussing programming with you. Marcus's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. That's incredibly kind, but I couldn't possibly. I mean, what would I even wear? I don't know anything about royal protocol, or you'd wear whatever you're comfortable in, Isabella interrupted gently. And there's no special protocol for Christmas dinner. We're actually quite normal when we're just family. Well, mostly normal, she added with a self-deprecating smile. Marcus looked around his small room as if seeing it for the first time. The contrast between his tiny bedsit and Kensington Palace seemed impossibly vast. I don't understand why you'd want me there. I'm just nobody special. Isabella felt her heart break a little at his words. Marcus, you're working 2 jobs while pursuing an education that will change your life. You're supporting yourself at 16 while planning to help your sister when she needs it. You've faced incredible challenges and responded with determination and grace. How is that not special? She paused, then continued more quietly. Besides, Christmas should be about bringing people together, especially people who might otherwise be alone. My grandmother always said that the best Christmas presents weren't things you could wrap. They were connections between people who needed each other. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with the offer. Finally, he looked up at her with tears in his eyes. I haven't had a real Christmas since before we went into care. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted somewhere. Well, you're wanted at our table, Isabella said firmly. The only question is whether you want to join us. Yes, Marcus said quickly, as if afraid he might lose his nerve. Yes, I would love that. Thank you. Isabella spent another hour with Marcus, learning more about his daily routine, his hopes for university, and his relationship with his sister. She was impressed by his intelligence and touched by his vulnerability. When it came time to leave, she gave him her private mobile number. "Text me if you have any questions about Christmas Day," she said. "And Marcus? I'm serious about what I said earlier. You're exactly the kind of person my family enjoys meeting." As her car pulled away from the modest building, Isabella felt a mixture of emotions. She was moved by Marcus's story and excited about bringing him into the royal Christmas celebration, but she was also overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility she felt. This young man was counting on her now, trusting her with his vulnerability. Margaret, who had been quietly observing throughout the visit, spoke first. "That was beautifully handled, Your Highness. He's a remarkable young man." "He really is," Isabella agreed. "I keep thinking about what his life might have been like with different circumstances. The unfairness of it is staggering." Detective Inspector Morrison, who had grown used to royal visits over his 15-year career protecting the family, found himself unexpectedly moved by what he had witnessed. "If I may say so, ma'am, what you did in there, treating him like family rather than charity, that will stay with him for the rest of his life." Isabella nodded, but her mind was already moving to the next challenge. Over the following 2 weeks, she would visit 11 more families and individuals, each with their own struggles and stories. She was learning that effective charity wasn't about grand gestures or large donations. It was about seeing people as complete human beings and responding to their actual needs rather than what you assumed they needed. The next visit took her to Manchester to meet the Johnson family. Sarah Johnson opened the door of her council flat with obvious nervousness, her 3 children peering shyly from behind her legs. 8-year-old Emma had dressed in her best school uniform for the occasion, while 6-year-old Tom clutched a small toy car, and 4-year-old Lucy sucked her thumb while staring wide-eyed at the princess. "Mrs. Johnson," Isabella said warmly, "thank you so much for welcoming me into your home. And these must be Emma, Tom, and Lucy. I've heard so much about you all." The small flat was immaculately clean, but showed signs of financial strain. Mismatched furniture, worn carpets, and toys that had seen better days. Sarah had clearly worked hard to make the space welcoming, with handmade Christmas decorations hung carefully around the living room. "Please come in," Sarah said, ushering Isabella and her small entourage into the cramped space. "I'm sorry it's not much, but it's lovely," Isabella said, and meant it. The flat might be small and worn, but it was filled with the warmth of a mother's love for her children. Family photographs covered the mantelpiece, and children's artwork was proudly displayed on the refrigerator. "I can see how much love you've put into making this a home." Emma stepped forward bravely. "Are you really a princess? Like in the stories?" Isabella knelt down to the child's level. "I am, though I don't get to wear sparkly dresses as often as the princesses in stories do." "What's your favorite story, Emma?" "Cinderella," Emma replied immediately. "She works really hard like Mummy does." The innocent observation hit Isabella like a physical blow. This 8-year-old already understood that her mother worked multiple jobs to keep their family afloat, just like the fictional character who scrubbed floors and did endless chores. Isabella spent the next 2 hours with the Johnson family, reading stories to the children while Sarah made tea with precious supplies she had clearly saved for the occasion. She learned that Sarah worked as a cleaner in office buildings during early morning hours, then as a lunch supervisor at a nearby school, then cleaned houses in the evenings when she could find work. The children attended breakfast club and after-school care to accommodate their mother's complicated schedule. "I feel terrible that they have to spend so much time in childcare," Sarah confided while the children played in their shared bedroom. "But I can't manage the rent and bills without multiple jobs." Their father, well, he stopped contributing months ago. Isabella could see the exhaustion in Sarah's face, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too little sleep and too much worry. Yet the woman never complained or asked for pity. She simply did whatever was necessary to care for her children. "What would help most?" Isabella asked directly. "If you could change one thing about your situation, what would it be?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly unused to anyone asking her opinion about her own needs. Honestly, reliable childcare that doesn't cost so much. I spend nearly half what I earn on breakfast club, after-school care, and holiday programs. If I could find something affordable and safe, I could maybe get one better job instead of running around to three different ones. Isabella made mental notes while they talked. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a one-time gift or donation. Sarah needed systemic support, help with childcare costs, perhaps assistance finding a single job with better pay and benefits, maybe educational opportunities that could lead to career advancement. When it came time to leave, little Lucy ran up to Isabella and wrapped her arms around the princess's legs. "Will you come back?" the 4-year-old asked. "I hope so, sweetheart," Isabella replied, kneeling to give the child a proper hug. Over Lucy's head, she looked at Sarah. "We're going to figure out some ways to help. This isn't just a one-time visit." As they drove away from the council estate, Isabella felt both inspired and overwhelmed. Each family she met presented complex challenges that couldn't be solved with traditional royal charity approaches. They needed long-term support, systemic changes, and, most importantly, they needed to be treated with dignity rather than pity. Margaret could see the wheels turning in Isabella's mind. "These visits are affecting you more than you expected, aren't they?" Isabella nodded slowly. "I thought I understood poverty and hardship from visiting hospitals and shelters. But this is different. These people aren't asking for handouts. They're working incredibly hard and still struggling. The system is failing them, not the other way around." Over the following days, Isabella visited families and individuals across the country. She met Harold Winters, the elderly widower in Liverpool who hadn't spoken to another person in 4 days when she arrived. She spent an afternoon with the Patel family in Birmingham, learning about the challenges immigrant families faced when traditional qualifications weren't recognized in their new country. Each visit reinforced Isabella's growing understanding that effective charity required more than good intentions and generous donations. It required systemic thinking, long-term commitment, and, most importantly, it required treating people as partners in solving their problems rather than passive recipients of help. As Christmas approached, Isabella found herself fundamentally changed by these experiences. The sheltered royal who had started this journey 3 weeks earlier was being replaced by someone with a deeper understanding of the world beyond palace walls and a burning determination to use her position to create lasting change. December 23rd arrived with a blanket of fresh snow covering London, transforming the city into a winter wonderland. Inside Kensington Palace, preparations for an unprecedented Christmas celebration were in full swing. For the first time in royal history, the family would be hosting not just their traditional relatives and close friends, but 12 carefully selected guests who represented some of Britain's most vulnerable citizens. Princess Isabella stood in the grand dining hall, overseeing the final preparations with an attention to detail that impressed even the palace staff who had worked royal events for decades. She had insisted that nothing about the arrangement should make their guests feel like charity cases or outsiders. Instead of the traditional formal seating that separated family from guests, she had requested round tables that would encourage conversation and connection. "Your Highness," called Thomas Hartwell, the palace's head butler, approaching with his customary dignified bearing. "The final guest confirmations have arrived. Young Master Marcus will be arriving tomorrow at 11, Mrs. Johnson and her children at noon, and Mr. Winters should arrive by 2 o'clock. Isabella smiled, checking items off her mental list. Over the past week, each of her guests had received personal calls from her, ensuring they felt welcomed rather than overwhelmed. She had arranged transportation for everyone, coordinated with their work schedules, and even had Margaret help select appropriate gifts that addressed real needs rather than generic presents. "Excellent, Thomas. And the children's area?" "Set up perfectly, ma'am. The nursery staff has prepared activities suitable for ages 4 through 13, and Chef Morrison has prepared special child-friendly versions of several dishes." Isabella had insisted on accommodating the children who would be joining them. The Johnson children, Lucy, who was 4, Tom at 6, and Emma at 8, would be joined by 2 other young guests, siblings from a foster family in Scotland whose placement had fallen through just before Christmas, leaving them in temporary emergency care. King Charles entered the dining hall, looking distinguished in a dark green sweater that Isabella had given him the previous Christmas. He surveyed the preparations with an expression that mixed pride with mild anxiety. "I must admit," he said, approaching his daughter, "when you first proposed this, I wasn't certain it would work. But, seeing how thoughtfully you've planned everything, I'm actually quite excited to meet our guests." "Really?" Isabella asked, feeling a flutter of relief. Her father's approval meant everything to her, and she had worried that the departure from tradition might make him uncomfortable. "Really," Charles confirmed. "Your grandmother always said that Christmas was about opening our hearts and our home to those who needed it most. I think she would be absolutely delighted by what you've organized." Queen Camilla joined them, carrying a stack of plays, cards written in elegant calligraphy. "I've just finished the seating arrangements," she announced. "I think you'll be pleased. I've mixed everyone together so our guests won't feel segregated from family members." Isabella hugged her stepmother gratefully. Camilla had embraced the unconventional Christmas plan from the beginning, even suggesting that they prepare traditional dishes from different cultures to honor the diverse backgrounds of their guests. "Has anyone heard from Marcus today?" Isabella asked. She had been particularly concerned about the 16-year-old, knowing that he would likely be the most intimidated by the royal setting. "He texted this morning," Margaret replied, joining the group with an armful of final details. "He's nervous but excited. Apparently he bought a new shirt for the occasion, and he's been researching royal etiquette online." Isabella laughed softly. "I specifically told him there was no special etiquette required. I hope he doesn't spend Christmas Day worrying about which fork to use. I suspect once he meets everyone, his nerves will settle," Camilla observed wisely. "For what you've told us about him, he sounds like a remarkable young man who simply hasn't had many opportunities to feel confident in social situations." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Prince William and Catherine with their children. The younger royals had enthusiastically supported Isabella's plan, and their children were excited about meeting new friends from very different backgrounds. "Aunt Isabella," called 10-year-old Prince George, running up to give her a hug. "Mummy says we're having the most special Christmas ever because we're sharing it with people who really need friends." Isabella knelt to embrace her nephew, touched by his innocent understanding of what they were trying to accomplish. "That's exactly right, George. Sometimes the best gifts we can give are friendship and kindness." Princess Charlotte, now 8, joined them with characteristic directness. "Will the other children know how to play the games we play? What if they don't know the rules?" "Then you can teach them," Isabella replied. "And maybe they'll teach you some games you've never played before. That's what makes new friendships exciting." As the family continued their preparations, Isabella found herself reflecting on how much she had changed since beginning this journey 3 weeks earlier. The visits to families like the Johnsons, to individuals like Marcus and Harold Winters, had opened her eyes to realities she had never fully grasped despite years of charitable work. She thought about Harold Winters, the elderly widower who would be joining them tomorrow. When she had visited him in Liverpool the previous week, she had found a man who had essentially given up on life after losing his beloved wife of 55 years. His small terraced house was immaculate but eerily quiet, filled with photographs of happier times but empty of joy. Harold had admitted to Isabella that some days he forgot to eat, not from lack of food but from lack of motivation. He had stopped bothering with Christmas entirely since Margaret died, seeing no point in celebrating alone. Isabella had spent hours with him, looking through photograph albums and hearing stories about his late wife, his children who lived abroad, and the community he felt increasingly disconnected from. "I never thought I'd see another proper Christmas," Harold had told her when she extended the invitation. "At my age, you don't expect life to surprise you anymore." Isabella had been moved by the dignity with which Harold carried his grief, and by his gradual warming to the idea of joining a family celebration. She had arranged for a car to collect him, knowing that the journey from Liverpool to London would be an adventure in itself for a man who rarely left his neighborhood anymore. The Johnson family presented different, but equally complex challenges. Sarah Johnson's exhaustion was visible in every line of her face, and Isabella had realized that what the family needed most wasn't gifts, but systemic support. Over the past week, Margaret had been working with local social services and charities to establish a support network that would continue long after Christmas ended. They had identified a community childcare program that could provide after-school care at reduced cost, freeing Sarah to pursue a single full-time job rather than juggling multiple part-time positions. They had also connected her with an adult education program that offered evening classes in business administration, potentially opening doors to better employment opportunities in the future. The key, Isabella had explained to Margaret, is treating them as partners in building solutions, not just recipients of charity. But it was Marcus Williams who had affected Isabella most profoundly. The 16-year-old's combination of vulnerability and determination reminded her daily of how arbitrary circumstances of birth could shape entire lives. She had spent considerable time over the past week ensuring that Marcus would have ongoing support beyond Christmas Day. Through her connections, she had arranged for him to be mentored by a successful software engineer who had also grown up in foster care. She had secured a small scholarship fund to help with his university applications and future tuition costs. Most importantly, she had connected him with other young adults who had successfully navigated the transition from care to independence. "I don't want him to feel like his life changed because he won some kind of lottery," Isabella had explained to her father. "I want him to understand that he deserves support and that there are people who believe in his potential." December 24th dawned clear and cold, with a kind of crisp winter air that made Christmas Eve feel magical even for adults who thought they had outgrown such feelings. Isabella woke early, her mind already racing through the final preparations for the next day's celebration. She spent the morning making last-minute calls to each of her guests, checking on their travel arrangements, and ensuring they had everything they needed. Marcus sounded nervous, but excited when they spoke, admitting that he had practiced conversations in his mirror to prepare for meeting the royal family. "Marcus," Isabella said gently, "please remember what I told you. We're excited to meet you because of who you are, not because we're doing you a favor. My cousin Peter is genuinely looking forward to talking about programming with someone his own age, and my father has been reading up on software engineering specifically so he can ask you intelligent questions about your interests." "Really?" Marcus asked, sounding surprised. "Really? We don't invite people to family Christmas dinner out of obligation. We invite them because we want them there." The call with Sarah Johnson was more complex. The single mother was clearly overwhelmed by the prospect of bringing her 3 children to a royal palace, worried about everything from their behavior to their clothing. "Sarah," Isabella said firmly, "I need you to trust me on this. Children are children, whether they're at a council flat or a palace. My nephews and niece are excited to meet Emma, Tom, and Lucy. And honestly, having children around will make the whole day more fun for everyone. But what if they break something? What if they don't mind their manners?" Sarah asked anxiously. Isabella laughed softly. "Then they'll be acting like normal children. Sarah, this palace has survived centuries of royal children, including some who were notorious for their misbehavior. Your children will be fine, and so will we." Her conversation with Harold Winters was the most touching. The elderly widower had called to express his gratitude, his voice shaky with emotion. "I can't remember the last time I had something to look forward to," he admitted. "Yesterday, I actually went to the shops and bought new clothes for tomorrow. Margaret always said I looked handsome in blue." She was right, Isabella replied warmly. "I can't wait to hear more stories about her tomorrow. And Harold, thank you for sharing Christmas with us. It means more than you know." That evening, Isabella attended Christmas Eve service at Westminster Abbey with her family, a tradition that had brought her comfort since childhood. As she knelt in prayer among the ancient stones and soaring arches, she found herself thinking not about royal obligations or public appearances, but about the faces of the people she had met over the past weeks. She prayed for Marcus, that he would find the confidence to pursue his dreams, and the support system to help him succeed. She prayed for the Johnson children, that they would grow up knowing their worth despite the financial struggles that surrounded them. She prayed for Harold Winters, that tomorrow would remind him that life could still hold joy even in grief. Most of all, she prayed that tomorrow would be the beginning of something larger, a new understanding of what royal service could mean in a modern world, and a deeper connection between the monarchy and the people they served. After the service, as the family walked back to their cars through the gentle snowfall, Princess Charlotte slipped her hand into Isabella's. "Aunt Isabella," the 8-year-old said seriously, "I think tomorrow is going to be the best Christmas ever." Looking down at her niece's trusting face, Isabella felt a surge of certainty that despite all the risks and uncertainties involved in departing from tradition, they were doing exactly what they needed to do. "I think you're absolutely right, Charlotte," she replied. "I think it's going to be magical." As midnight approached, marking the official beginning of Christmas Day, Isabella lay awake in her childhood bedroom, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow would be unlike any royal Christmas in history, and she knew that whatever happened, it would change not only her understanding of her role as a princess, but the lives of 12 people who had never expected to find themselves sharing Christmas dinner with the royal family. Through her window, she could see the snow continuing to fall, blanketing the palace grounds in pristine white. Everything felt possible, everything felt right, and for the first time since her grandmother's death, Isabella felt truly excited about Christmas morning. Christmas morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the frost-covered windows of Kensington Palace, creating patterns of light that danced across the ornate ceilings and polished floors. Princess Isabella had been awake since dawn, her excitement and nervous energy making sleep impossible. Today would either be the most meaningful Christmas of her life or a well-intentioned disaster that she would regret forever. She dressed carefully in an emerald green wool dress that was elegant but not intimidating, paired with simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. Every choice had been deliberate. She wanted to look welcoming rather than formal, approachable rather than distant. The first guest to arrive was Marcus Williams, who stepped out of the palace car, looking remarkably composed despite his obvious nervousness. He wore a crisp white shirt, dark trousers, and a navy blazer that Isabella suspected had been purchased specifically for this occasion. His hair was carefully styled, and he carried himself with a dignity that impressed everyone who met him. "Marcus," Isabella called out warmly as she met him at the entrance. "You look absolutely perfect. How was the journey from Wales?" "Incredible," Marcus replied honestly, his eyes wide as he took in the grandeur around him. "I've never been in a car that nice, and seeing London from the bridges was amazing. Thank you for arranging everything." "My pleasure entirely," Isabella said, linking her arm through his in a gesture that was both warm and reassuring. "Come on, let me introduce you to everyone. My cousin Peter is dying to meet you. He's been researching Python programming all week, so he could keep up with your conversation." Marcus's tension visibly decreased as Isabella led him through the palace halls, pointing out artwork and sharing casual family stories rather than formal historical lectures. By the time they reached the main reception room, he was walking more naturally and asking questions about the Christmas decorations. King Charles was the first family member Marcus met, and Isabella held her breath as her father approached. Charles had been coached extensively on making their guests feel comfortable, but royal protocol was deeply ingrained in his behavior. "Marcus," Charles said with genuine warmth, extending his hand with no ceremony whatsoever. "Isabella has told us so much about you. I understand you're interested in software engineering. I've been reading about artificial intelligence and machine learning, fascinating fields. I'd love to hear your perspective on where the technology is headed." Marcus's face lit up immediately. "Your Majesty, yes, I think AI is going to revolutionize everything. I've been working on a small project that uses machine learning to optimize delivery routes for small businesses." Within minutes, Marcus was explaining his programming project with growing confidence, while Charles listened with obvious interest asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated he had indeed done his research. Isabella watched with relief and pride as the 16-year-old began to relax and engage naturally with the King of England. The Johnson family arrived precisely at noon, Sarah looking overwhelmed but determined while her 3 children stared in wonder at the palace entrance. Little Lucy clutched her mother's hand tightly, while Tom carried his favorite toy car, and Emma had dressed in her best school uniform despite Isabella's assurances that formal dress wasn't necessary. "Mrs. Johnson," Isabella said, approaching the family with arms outstretched, "welcome to our home." "And Emma, Tom, Lucy, I've been so excited to see you again." Lucy immediately ran to Isabella and wrapped her arms around the princess's legs, her 4-year-old shyness forgotten in her enthusiasm. "Princess, you came back. I told you I would," Isabella laughed, scooping the little girl up for a proper hug. "And I've got some new friend for you to meet. Prince George and Princess Charlotte are about your ages, and they've been asking about you all week." Sarah watched with amazement as her children were welcomed not as charity cases, but as honored guests. Isabella led them through the palace with the same warm attention she had given Marcus, stopping to let the children examine Christmas decorations and explaining the history behind various rooms in terms they could understand. When they entered the main reception area, Princess Charlotte immediately approached Emma Johnson with the directness typical of 8-year-old girls. "I'm Charlotte," she announced. "Aunt Isabella says you're really smart and that you help take care of your little sister and brother. Want to see the Christmas tree? It's enormous and has lights that change colors." Emma looked to her mother for permission, received an encouraging nod, and followed Charlotte toward the magnificent tree that dominated one corner of the room. Within moments, the 2 girls were chattering as if they had known each other for years. Tom, meanwhile, had caught sight of Prince George's collection of toy cars arranged beneath the tree and was clearly torn between shyness and intense curiosity. George, noticing Tom's interest, approached with characteristic royal diplomacy. "Do you like cars?" George asked, picking up a particularly impressive racing car model. "This was my favorite. It actually makes engine sounds if you press this button." The demonstration broke the ice completely, and soon both boys were on the floor examining the various vehicles and sharing their knowledge of different makes and models. Harold Winters arrived at 2 o'clock, and Isabella felt her heart skip when she saw the transformation in the elderly widower. He wore a crisp blue shirt that brought out his eyes. His white hair was carefully combed, and he carried himself with a dignity that spoke of his efforts to rise to the occasion. More importantly, his face held an expression of wonder and anticipation that Isabella hadn't seen during their previous meeting. "Harold," she said, taking both his hands in hers, "you look absolutely distinguished. Margaret would be so proud to see you today." Harold's eyes misted slightly at the mention of his late wife. "She always said I cleaned up well when I made an effort. I wish she could see all this. She would have been beside herself with excitement." "I have a feeling she can see it," Isabella said gently. "And I know she'd be delighted that you're here to share Christmas with us." Queen Camilla approached them with perfect timing, having observed the emotional moment from a respectful distance. "Harold, I'm Camilla. Isabella has told us wonderful stories about your garden and your late wife's roses. I'm quite passionate about gardening myself. I'd love to hear about your techniques for winter rose care." Harold's face brightened immediately. Gardening had been one of his few remaining joys since Margaret's death, and Camilla's genuine interest provided the perfect bridge into comfortable conversation. Isabella watched with gratitude as her stepmother gently drew Harold into a discussion that made him feel valued for his knowledge and experience. As the afternoon progressed, the remaining guests arrived. A young single father from Scotland whose job layoffs had left him struggling to provide Christmas for his daughter, an elderly couple who had been caring for their grandchildren after their daughter's battle with addiction, foster siblings who had aged out of care, and several others whose stories had touched Isabella's heart during her visits. Each arrival was handled with the same careful attention to dignity and warmth. Isabella had briefed every family member extensively, ensuring that each guest would be greeted not with pity or formal charity, but with genuine interest in their lives and experiences. The magic of the day truly began when they gathered for Christmas dinner. Isabella had insisted on a buffet-style service rather than formal courses, allowing people to move around, interact naturally, and help themselves to whatever appealed to them. The children ate together at a specially prepared table, while adults mixed freely around several round tables that encouraged conversation across social boundaries. Marcus found himself seated between Prince Peter and King Charles, initially nervous but quickly drawn into an animated discussion about technology and its potential to solve social problems. His confidence grew throughout the meal as he realized that the royal family was genuinely interested in his thoughts and opinions, not merely being polite. You know, Marcus said during a lull in conversation, 3 weeks ago, I was planning to spend Christmas alone with a ready meal and Netflix. I still can't quite believe I'm here. I'm glad you are here, Charles replied sincerely. Isabella was absolutely right to invite you. You bring a perspective and energy that enriches all of us. Across the room, Sarah Johnson was engaged in conversation with Queen Camilla and Princess Catherine about the challenges of working parenthood. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like her struggles were being understood rather than judged, and she found herself sharing insights and receiving practical advice from other mothers who, despite their privileged circumstances, clearly understood the universal challenges of raising children. The guilt is the worst part, Sarah admitted. Knowing that your children are in after-school care because you have to work multiple jobs to pay rent, wondering if you're failing them somehow. Every working mother feels that guilt, Catherine replied warmly. The circumstances may be different, but the worry about whether we're doing enough, whether we're getting the balance right, that's universal. And for what I can see, your children are remarkable. They're kind, well-behaved, and clearly know they're loved. That's what matters most. Meanwhile, Harold Winters had become the center of attention at his table, regaling Princess and several other guests with stories from his 55-year marriage. His tales of romance, adventure, and everyday devotion had everyone laughing and occasionally wiping away tears. Margaret always said that marriage wasn't about finding someone you could live with, Harold said with a gentle smile. It was about finding someone you couldn't imagine living without. We had our struggles, of course, but we faced them together. That made all the difference. Princess, and known for her direct manner, leaned forward with obvious interest. What would you tell young people today about building lasting relationships? Harold considered the question carefully. Listen more than you talk. Say thank you for the small things. Never go to bed angry. And remember that love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling that happens to you. The afternoon flew by in a blur of conversations, laughter, and connections that transcended social boundaries. Children played together regardless of their backgrounds. Adults shared stories and advice, and everyone seemed to forget about the differences in their circumstances. The most touching moment came when little Lucy Johnson approached King Charles with the fearless confidence that only a 4-year-old could muster. "Are you really the king?" she asked, climbing onto his lap without invitation. "I am indeed," Charles replied with amusement, adjusting his position to make her more comfortable. "Do you have a crown?" Lucy continued, examining his hair as if expecting to find royal headwear hidden there. "I do, but I don't wear it very often. It's quite heavy and not very comfortable for dinner." Lucy considered this seriously. "My mummy works really hard too. She doesn't wear a crown either, but I think she should because she's the most important person in the whole world." The simple observation brought tears to Sarah's eyes and reminded everyone present of the profound truth that children often see more clearly than adults. That worth isn't determined by titles or wealth, but by love and dedication to others. As the day drew toward evening, Isabella gathered everyone in the main reception room for the gift exchange. But these weren't traditional Christmas presents. Isabella had worked with Margaret to identify meaningful items that addressed real needs while honoring each person's dignity. Marcus received a high-end laptop computer with software development tools, along with information about mentorship programs and scholarship opportunities. But, more importantly, he received a handwritten letter from Princess Isabella promising ongoing support for his education and career development. The Johnson family received not toys and clothes, but vouchers for educational programs, connections to supportive services, and, most significantly, a trust fund that would help cover childcare costs while Sarah pursued additional education and better employment opportunities. Harold Winters received gardening supplies and books about rose cultivation, but also something more precious, a standing invitation to visit the palace gardens whenever he wanted, and an introduction to the head gardener who was eager to learn from Harold's decades of experience. Each gift was presented with careful attention to the recipient's dignity and long-term needs rather than immediate charity. Isabella had learned from her visits that sustainable help required addressing systemic issues, not just providing temporary relief. These aren't gifts, Isabella explained as she presented the final item. These are investments in relationships that we hope will continue long beyond today. You've all taught us so much about resilience, determination, and the importance of community. We're honored to be part of your lives going forward. As the evening concluded and arrangements were made to transport everyone safely home, the atmosphere was one of genuine sadness at parting combined with excitement about future connections. Phone numbers were exchanged, plans were made for future visits, and promises were given that this would be the beginning rather than the end of these relationships. Marcus approached Isabella as he prepared to leave, his eyes bright with emotions he seemed to be struggling to express. "Your Highness," he began, then stopped and corrected himself. "Isabella, I don't know how to thank you for today, for everything you've arranged, for treating me like family." "Marcus," Isabella replied, taking his hands in hers, "you are family now." That's what today was about, expanding our definition of family to include the people who matter regardless of circumstances. I hope you know that you can call me anytime, visit anytime, and that we're genuinely invested in your success. "I won't let you down," Marcus said with quiet determination. "You couldn't possibly let us down," Isabella assured him. "You're already extraordinary. We're just honored to be part of your journey." Sarah Johnson's goodbye was equally emotional. The exhausted single mother had spent the day watching her children play with princes and princesses, seeing them valued and celebrated in ways she had never imagined possible. "I don't know how you knew," Sarah said through tears, "but this was exactly what we needed. Not just the practical help, though that means everything, but the reminder that we matter, that our struggles don't define our worth." "They absolutely don't," Isabella confirmed. "You're raising 3 remarkable children under incredibly challenging circumstances. You're a hero, Sarah, even if you don't feel like one most days." Harold Winters' departure was perhaps the most touching of all. The elderly widower had visibly transformed throughout the day, rediscovering joy and connection he had thought were lost forever. "Margaret always said that life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it," he told Isabella as they stood by the palace entrance. "Today proved her right once again. I came here thinking I was receiving charity, but I'm leaving with something much more valuable, hope." "You gave us hope too, Harold," Isabella replied. "Your wisdom, your stories about Margaret, your perspective on life and love, you enriched our Christmas immeasurably." As the last car disappeared into the snowy London evening, Isabella stood with her family in the palace entrance, all of them quiet as they processed what they had experienced. That, announced Princess Charlotte with 8-year-old certainty, was definitely the best Christmas ever. King Charles put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I have to admit, you were absolutely right about this. It was unconventional, it was risky, and it was perfect. Your grandmother would have been so proud." Isabella felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she thought about Queen Elizabeth, about the values she had instilled, and about how those values had guided this extraordinary day. "I think she was here with us today," Isabella said softly. In every moment of connection, every laugh shared across different backgrounds, every reminder that our humanity is what unites us. As they walked back into the palace, Isabella knew that this Christmas had changed not only the lives of their 12 guests, but the future of royal service itself. They had proven that charity wasn't about maintaining distance between the privileged and the struggling. It was about building bridges, creating relationships, and recognizing the fundamental dignity and worth of every person. The most heartwarming royal Christmas moment of the year had become much more than a single day of celebration. It had become the foundation for a new understanding of what it meant to serve others with love, respect, and genuine commitment to lasting change. And in the years that followed, as Isabella continued to build relationships with families like the Johnsons, young adults like Marcus, and elderly friends like Harold, Christmas Day 2025 would be remembered not as the day royalty helped the unfortunate, but as the day a princess learned that true service meant opening not just your palace, but your heart to the remarkable people who make up the fabric of any nation. The snow continued to fall outside the palace windows as the royal family gathered around their fireplace, each lost in thoughts about the connections they had made and the lives they had touched. It had been, without question, the most meaningful Christmas any of them had ever experienced.